You're watching Southern Crimes.
February 11th, 1979, Hāna Bay, Maui. You're one of 5 friends preparing for a perfect day of fishing. The morning sun reflects off water so calm, it looks like glass. The 17-foot Boston whaler, Sarah Joe, rocks gently beneath your feet. You and the other guys load gear and bait, joking and laughing all the while. All is well today. Everything feels normal. You've been fishing these waters your entire life. 50 years of collective experience between the 5 of you. The Alanui Haha Channel can be treacherous, but today feels different. It's peaceful, inviting, safe. By 1 p.m., you're miles from shore when you notice the wind picking up. What started as a gentle breeze becomes something more urgent, more violent. The flat water begins to churn, and within minutes, 40-foot waves are crashing over your small boat. The storm came from nowhere, transforming paradise into a nightmare of wind and water that swallows everything in its path. 9 years later, your boat will be found on a remote atoll, 2,000 miles away, with only one grave marked by a driftwood cross and mysterious Chinese burial papers. Because in the vast Pacific, where the waters carry secrets, across thousands of miles of open ocean, some fishing trips end not with a catch, but with a mystery that spans decades. This is Southern Crimes. Kauaʻi, Hawaii, March 1981. The Kuilau Ridge Trail on the Garden Isle of Kauaʻi is often described as a walk through a prehistoric world. Huge, ancient ferns blanket the forest floor, and enormous tropical trees create a dense, emerald canopy that pretty much can block out the midday sun. It's a scenic 3-mile path that promises hikers a breathtaking view of the valley. But in the spring of 1981, this paradise became the setting for a mystery that would rattle Hawaii's billion-dollar tourism industry to its core. John and Michelle Klein were a young, successful couple from Los Angeles. John was a 28-year-old attorney. Michelle was a 25-year-old writer for Sunkist Growers. They arrived on Kauaʻi on March 18th for a hiking vacation, a final escape before returning to their busy lives back in California. On the morning of March 21st, their rental car was spotted at the Kuilau trailhead at 7 a.m. They were scheduled to fly home that afternoon, but they never checked back into their room, and they never made their flight. 4 days later, search and rescue teams followed a pig trail, a narrow, muddy side path about 150 feet off the main hiking trail. There, they found a nightmare. The couple had been bullet-riddled, shot multiple times at close range. John was found lying on his back. Michelle was found face down on top of him. It was as if she'd been trying to protect him or was pushed down in a final, frantic struggle. The scene was immediately baffling. John's wallet was still in his shorts, and Michelle's purse sat untouched in their rental car. Robbery was off the table. This wasn't a mugging gone wrong. It was an execution. The investigation, bolstered by the FBI, initially looked for illegal marijuana grow sites, theorizing the couple had stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see. But the police found no crops in the area. Then the leads turned toward the couple's personal life. Back at their rental condo, investigators found boxes of pizza and a brand of cigarettes that neither John nor Michelle smoked, suggesting that they'd invited someone into their private space just before the hike, someone they likely trusted. The timing of these murders couldn't have been worse for the islands. Hawaii was already reeling from a string of violent crimes against tourists, where the local suspects had been acquitted despite overwhelming evidence. The Klein case became a symbol of a lawless paradise. In response, the governor scrambled to pass new laws, even arranging for airlines to provide free flights for victims to return and testify, all in an effort to save the state's reputation. Despite over 100 anonymous tips and a mysterious woman who called the police claiming to know what happened before hanging up, no one was ever charged. The emerald stillness of the Kuilau Ridge remained unchanged. Today, hikers still traverse the ridge, passing the spot where the pig trail veers into the brush, unaware that 45 years ago, the prehistoric canopy of Kauaʻi swallowed the secrets of a killer who walked back out of the woods and disappeared forever. Oahu, January 21st, 1982. On a night defined by torrential rain and mudslides, 19-year-old Lisa Au was driving from her boyfriend's apartment in Makiki back to her home in Kailua. The weather was so severe that the Pali Highway was a gauntlet of falling debris and standing water. Lisa never made it home. The following morning, her 1976 Toyota was found abandoned on the highway. 10 days later, a jogger found her nude, decomposing remains in a ravine off Tantalus Drive, 10 miles away from her car. The discovery of the vehicle ignited a wave of panic that gripped the entire island of Oahu. The driver's side window was rolled down halfway, and Lisa's registration was missing. To the public and the Honolulu Police Department, it looked like a textbook traffic stop. The theory that a killer cop had used his blue lights to lure Lisa to her death became the singular focus of the investigation. The crosshairs landed squarely on Officer Thomas Byrne. He lived near the Au family, had a prior conviction for a sex offense, and a witness claimed to have seen him pulling someone over in an unmarked car that night. The quote-unquote killer cop hysteria was so intense that HPD actually banned the use of flashing blue lights on car grills to reassure terrified female drivers. Yet, despite years of grand jury testimony, no indictment was ever handed down. By 1985, lead detectives admitted they had no evidence linking a city employee to the crime. As the years passed, the killer cop theory began to look less like a lead and more like institutional tunnel vision. Private investigators hired by the Au family discovered a string of botched basics. Detectives hadn't interviewed a security guard who saw Lisa and her boyfriend Doug Holmes arguing just before she disappeared. And they hadn't even checked the grocery store where she was last seen, overlooking the fact that her missing license had actually been left at the checkout counter. Then, there was the boyfriend, Doug Holmes. He was the last person to see her alive, and the one who miraculously found her car the next morning. He had fresh scratches on his face and failed 2 polygraph tests. A newspaper delivery driver even identified him in a photo lineup, claiming she saw him on Tantalus Drive at 2:30 a.m. with a quote-unquote limp female passenger. But the lead detective dismissed him, famously stating he saw no motive for Holmes to kill her. Decades later, the case of Lisa Au is a masterclass in forensic frustration. During a 1983 exhumation, it was discovered that her body had been buried in its original police body bag, unwashed and covered in leaves and dirt from the ravine. Today, the investigation is haunted by the fact that Lisa's skull and jawbone, removed for testing in the 1980s, have seemingly vanished from evidence lockers. The HPD Cold Case Squad, established in 2018, continues to sift through the remains of the file, but with the key witnesses deceased and primary evidence missing, the truth remains buried somewhere between the Pali Highway and the ravine at Tantalus. At 3:15 p.m., a colleague went upstairs to find her for a planned trip to the North Shore. Within 15 minutes, Diane was nowhere to be seen. Her car keys and her purse were still sitting in the studio. Diane was gone. For 5 years, the case was treated as a missing person investigation. There were no witnesses to an abduction and no signs of a struggle in the busy building. It wasn't until 1990 that the Honolulu Police Department deployed a new forensic tool that would change everything: luminol. When detectives sprayed the chemical in the upstairs bathroom of the dance studio, the room lit up. Even though the floor had been retiled, blood had seeped deep into the original grout. The dance studio wasn't just a place where Diane had disappeared, it was a crime scene. The investigation immediately centered on one primary person of interest, the photographer who was the last person to see Diane. Detectives noted he had fresh, unexplained scratches on his torso in the days following the disappearance. His polygraph results were questionable, and he lived on a family property in Pearl City that bordered a dense marsh. In 1991, investigators waded into that marsh. They recovered a pair of black tights and a hairpiece, items identical to the dance gear Diane was wearing the day she vanished. Most chillingly, forensic experts found what appeared to be a disturbed grave in the mud. The timing suggested that the body had been buried there in 1985, but was dug up and moved in 1990, right around the time the police had returned to the dance studio with their luminol. Despite the blood evidence and the recovered items, the case hit a wall in the justice system. A 1993 investigative grand jury heard 300 hours of testimony, but ultimately declined to indict the suspect. Without a body, the prosecution couldn't prove the how or where of Diane's death to a legal certainty. Diane's disappearance occurred during a terrifying era for women in Oahu. The Honolulu Strangler was active, leaving a trail of bodies across the island, and the unsolved murder of Lisa Au was still fresh in the public's mind. While police determined Diane didn't fit the Strangler's profile, she was taken from a crowded building, not a roadside, the collective fear led to a massive overhaul of Hawaii's stalking and harassment laws. Today, the Rosalie Woodson Dance Academy case remains open. Diane's parents sadly passed away without ever knowing what happened to their daughter. Detectives are now banking on the very thing that broke the case open 30 years ago: science. They hope that the trace blood evidence preserved from the bathroom floor can finally be matched to a suspect through modern genetic genealogy, turning a 15-minute mystery into a final conviction. Hāna Bay, Maui, February 11th, 1979. Hāna Bay is usually a pretty serene place, but the Alinui Ha'a Channel just beyond it is one of the most treacherous stretches of water in the world. On a morning that began as flat as a lake, 5 inseparable friends known as the Nahiku Gorillas set out on the Sarah Joe, a 17-foot Boston whaler, for a day of pleasure fishing. They were experienced watermen with over 50 years of collective seagoing knowledge, but they never returned. By 1 p.m. that afternoon, a freak gale force wind roared down from the mountains. Within hours, the channel had transformed into a cacophony of 40-foot waves. Not long after, the Coast Guard launched a massive 73,000 square mile search, even deploying an experimental quote-unquote Project Sea Hunt helicopter using pigeons trained to spot orange life vests. But the ocean was empty. After 5 days, the search was called off. The town of Hāna mourned their 5 sons, believing they'd been swallowed by the storm. Nearly a decade later, in September 1988, the mystery took a staggering turn. A marine biologist on a wildlife expedition in the Marshall Islands, over 2,000 miles away from Maui, stumbled across a battered hull on the uninhabited Taungi Atoll. The Hawaiian registration number was still visible. It was the Sarah Joe. 60 yards from the boat, investigators found a simple grave marked by a driftwood cross and heaped coral stones. Inside were the skeletal remains of just one crew member, Scott Moorman. But as the grave was excavated, the story became even more surreal. Buried with Scott was a mysterious stack of white paper, 3 inches square, with small pieces of aluminum foil interleaved between the pages. Experts believe these were joss papers, spirit money used in Chinese burial rituals to provide wealth in the afterlife. The theory is that illegal Chinese fishermen found the Sarah Joe and gave Scott a respectful burial, but then fled without reporting it to avoid being caught in protected waters. But the discovery only deepened the mystery. A government survey of that exact spot in 1985, 6 years after the disappearance, had found no sign of the boat. If the Sarah Joe had been found there in 1988, well, where had it been for the previous 6 years? And what happened to the other 4 men? Today, the hull of the Sarah Joe has been returned to Hāna, where it sits in a family yard as a memorial to the twin brother and friends who vanished. 5 Norfolk pine trees stand on a hill overlooking the town, 1 for each man. While the discovery of Scott Moorman provided a fragment of a map, the final years of the 5 men remain a ghost story of the Pacific. Wainapanapa State Park, Maui, July 2019. Maui's road to Hāna is a 64-mile journey through 620 curves and 59 bridges, a route that tourists often call the drive of a lifetime. For 23-year-old Khiara Henry, it was a trip she'd planned, with the same adventurous spirit that defined her life back in San Diego. A member of the Sequoian band of the Kuilau Nation, Khiara was an avid hiker and a dedicated vegan who moved through nature with ease. On July 21st, 2019, at around 2 p.m., Khiara rented a black Nissan Sentra at the Kahului airport for a quick one-day solo trip to Hāna. It was the last time she was ever seen. Within hours, her digital life went silent. Her credit cards weren't swiped, and every call to her cell phone began dropping directly to voicemail. 2 days later, park officials at Wainapanapa State Park noticed the Nissan Sentra sitting in a gravel lot. It looked abandoned, but it wasn't until the 26th that a formal missing person report was filed. When police finally opened the car, they found a haunting scene. Khiara's luggage was still in the back, and her ID and credit cards were tucked away in the center console. The only things missing were her small black backpack, her car